I'd like to welcome everybody to this rather auspicious occasion. We're here to honor our founding and longtime members of the shul. You can tell who the founding members are by the white flowers they have in their lapels. And when I look about, I see probably most of the founding members are actually here. Given that the shul was founded 50 years ago, what this tells this engineering brain is that the founding and early members of this shul must have been in their 20s and 30s when they tried to change a dream into a reality. Think of it. They were either very chutzpahdik or very brave. Who in their early 30s, just starting a family, puts their signature guaranteeing a huge loan on a dream they'll never actually own, and yet these people did it? And the proof is, we're dining tonight in the shul they built, the shul you built, with dedication and love. So now the board just passed a strategic plan that will be the foundation for the next 50 years of Beth Tikvah. And one of the key pillars of that plan is developing a culture of volunteerism. It's obvious to me that you don't have to look really very far than the people in this room to see what volunteering can and has built. Now, Kathy and I are very new members here. We only joined about 11 years ago. And you might ask, how does a new member become president so quickly? And it's simple physiology, really. If you look closely, you'll see that the size of my mouth far exceeds that of my brain. And perhaps that might be true of some of the past presidents in this room, but I don't think so. Here I am, president in my 70s and pretty well retired, but the same is not true for the past presidents who are here tonight. For almost all of them, as far as I know, were relatively young and very much in the middle of making their careers when they were presidents. So how they did it, frankly, I'll never know, because I know it takes countless hours to actually do the job, and yet they did it, for which we all owe them a debt of gratitude. Now, Rabbi Grover is later going to introduce our speaker tonight, Ron Daniels. For now, I'd like to welcome Ron and his wife, Joanne Rosen. Right, we didn't meet you before. So, hi, I'm Herschel. And I'd like to welcome Ron back to the shul that he grew up in. If you haven't figured it out by now, Ron is the son of Helen Daniels. Helen contributed to Beth Tikvah and continues to do so in many ways, and I'm not going to get into them tonight, including funding and volunteering, and actually recently a co-chair of the Chesed committee that got reformed. But it's for none of those that I would like to thank Helen. Rather, I'd like to thank her for rearing children such as Ron, who have grown up in the shul and have gone out and made this world a better place. And Ron, if this puts some pressure on you tonight, then it's intentional. Now, as I mentioned before, volunteerism is the foundation of this shul, and this evening's event is no exception. It takes countless hours of volunteer work to put such an evening together. And I'd like to make note of the organizing committee. Doris, and this is in alphabetical order, Doris Alter, Hannah Balak, Mona Brown, Lillian Cornfield, Rabbi Grover, Gail Kurtzman, Gloria Pincus, Norman Stern, Sigal Tush, Toby Zarnett, and the leader of this motley crew, Marlene Axsmith, herself a founding member. So where is Marlene? Marlene, would you raise your hand? Oh, back there. Okay, so Marlene, as leader of the group, I'd like you to ask you to come up here, please. I have a bouquet from the shul for you. So next is Rabbi Grover. I'd like you to please come up here and do the invocation, please.
Thank you, Hirsch. Mizmor LeTodah. Hariu l'Adonai kol haaretz, ivdu et Adonai b'simcha. Bo'u lefanav birnana, te'u ki Adonai hu Elohim hu asanu v'lo anachnu, amo v'tzon marito. Bo'u she'arav b'todah, chatzerotav b'tila, hodulo, baruchu shemo, ki tov Adonai le'olam chasto, ve'ador v'ador emunato. A psalm of thanksgiving. Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful songs. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name, for the Lord is good, and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all the generations. Dear friends, on behalf of our Assistant Rabbi Louis Sachs, Cantor Tibor Kavari, our Ritual Director Irv Kirschenblatt, I also want to welcome you all and thank you very much for being here at tonight's special dinner gala, paying tribute to the founders of our synagogue and commemorating our very, very long 50th anniversary. We are extremely privileged to have as our guest speaker tonight a visionary teacher and thinker and institution builder who speaks regularly to the most esteemed audiences all around the world. Thank you, Ron, for agreeing to be here tonight. But as privileged as we are to have you with us, I have to say, like Hirsch, that we are even more privileged to have your wife Joanne here and a big, big chunk of your extended family. To all of you, the Daniels clan, your presence here, as Hirsch said, is a wonderful tribute to your mother, Helen, who we love very, very much around here. But I want to add that it is also a great tribute to your father, the late Phil Daniels of blessed memory. I feel very privileged myself to have gotten to know Phil in my first few years at Beth Tikvah. He was a friend to many, many, many people in this room. He was a remarkable man with an even more remarkable story. For all of the causes that he supported, they include day schools, synagogues, community centers, and charities. He shied away from honor and recognition. He had a huge heart, believed in being a force for good in the lives of others and children in particular. He was more than just a founder of our shul. We would not have a Beth Tikvah if it was not for Phil and his vision. We would be remiss tonight if we did not mention that to him we are forever indebted, and his memory remains a blessing. The psalm that I recited, Mizmor LeTodah, was once sung in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. In the course of the temple service, there was a person whose life had been delivered from great peril, different person every time, who would come forward and offer a special sacrifice called the Todah, the thank you. And when his or her offering was placed on the altar, the psalm that I read was sung. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful song. Reminding us that Judaism is supposed to be celebrated, not commemorated, embraced joyfully with purpose and meaning. And most importantly, the psalm affirmed that joy must be passed down, ador vador, from one generation to another. For over 50 years, Beth Tikvah, I think, has been trying to model these values of joy, of community, of song, and of continuity. How many brisses and baby namings, bar and bat mitzvahs, ofrufs, weddings, deaths, and bereavements have been commemorated in this space. Through all of life's transitions and all of our great holiday celebrations, we have sought to guide and educate each other by empowering one another to take hold of Judaism for ourselves, not for the sake of continuity, but because of the richness, the meaning, the power of the Jewish story, and because of the infinite value that we believe dwells in every single person, in every single mitzvah. In 50 years, modesty has been the core of our identity. I know that. We don't boast. We're not a fancy shul. But believe me when I tell everyone here, I run into folks all the time who tell me that Beth Tikvah has transformed their lives, transformed them for the better, and has enriched the world, the Jewish world and the secular world, in very significant ways. Tonight, in celebrating our anniversary, let us begin by giving thanks to God, Mizmor LeTodah, for the journey that started all those years ago, for the dreamers and the planners, the organizers and the builders, the selfless acts and the generous donors. We celebrate all the joys that Beth Tikvah has enabled, all the happy times, all the accomplishments, and all the triumphs. We remember all those who have passed on of blessed memory, whose lives intertwine with the story of our community. We acknowledge that there have been and will continue to be struggles and heartaches along the way, but we will continue to travel together, remaining focused on our core missions, the teaching of Torah, the servants of God, and the welfare of the Jewish people and all of humanity. Thank you, Lord, for being with us in good times and bad. Make Beth Tikvah a blessing to those we work with, and may you embolden us to move forward with strength towards what lies ahead. And let us say, Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Grover. So, Helen, how would you like to come up and do the mutzi?
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. I will.
Okay, you may eat. It's taken 50 years.
And she's buried there.
And then he asked him around my finger.
So when we started this evening, I made mention of our past presidents, but there's one past president who I always address as Mr. President, namely our founding president, Harvey Haber. So, Mr. President, I don't know where he is, would you please come up here to make a few brief remarks about the founding members? Harvey, oh, there you are. Mr. President.
15 minutes is what I'm going to use. Rabbi Grover, Rabbi Sachs, Kata Kavari, Irv Kirschenblatt, and all of you. Let's start this evening with a bit of a smile. Rabbi approaches Mendel. He says to him, Mendel, Shabbos comes, you sit in the last row, you're gloomy, you're unhappy, you never smile. What's going on, Mendel? Mendel says, Rabbi, I'm 25 years old. I want to get married. Every girl I bring home, my mother doesn't like. So the rabbi says, you know what? I got an idea for you. He says, find a girl that looks like your mother, talks like your mother, walks like your mother, just like your mother. He's okay. A couple months go by, the rabbi meets him again. He says, Mendel, what happened? He says, Rabbi, I did everything you told me to do. I found a girl that walks like my mother, talks like my mother, sings like my mother, everything like my mother. So the rabbi says, what happened? He says, Rabbi, it didn't work. The rabbi says, how come? He says, my father didn't like her. She looks just like my mother. I should stop here. As Beth Tikvah's founding president, I am absolutely delighted to welcome Ron Daniels, the current and 14th president of the Johns Hopkins University. And I also want to welcome his wife, Joanne. Joanne, delighted to see you. I want to say how pleased we are that Ron will be speaking this evening, an evening dedicated to celebrating our 50th anniversary year and to honoring Beth Tikvah's founding members. 50 years ago, it was the courage, commitment, and determination of our founding members who made it possible for us today to be able to celebrate this wonderful institution of Beth Tikvah Synagogue. Ron, many people here today are not aware that your family has been an integral part of this synagogue, Beth Tikvah, our house of hope, from day one. People might not know that Ron's father, the late Phil Daniels, Zichrono Livracha, our first planning and development chairman, and his mother, Helen Daniels, sub-searched the title of each property on the west side of Bayview from Shepherd to Finch to find the land on which our synagogue, Beth Tikvah, sits today. Did you know that 50 years ago we had a very successful draw? Helen Daniels did an incredible job selling tickets that evening, and we raised the money to the penny, folks, to the penny, for the down payment to purchase our land, which down payment had to be made the very next day. Did you know that Sherry Tikvah, a conservative synagogue operating out of a portable on Woodbine Avenue, north of Steeles, together with the Bayview Synagogue Association, a group of about 50 families, 30 families from the Bayview area, merged to become Beth Tikvah Synagogue? Did you know that the reason that our synagogue building is set so far back from Bayview is because in the original design, a formal sanctuary was to be built in front of our present building? Good luck. Did you know that our founding rabbi, Rabbi Herbert Fader, was both the rabbi and our cantor at our services at Beth Tikvah for over 18 years, before making Aliyah to Israel with his wife Leona, Zichrono Livracha, and their children Nechama and David? We have been blessed that Bracha Fader stayed here in Toronto to enrich our lives with her gift of teaching Torah. We could not have built Beth Tikvah without our founding members, and we are grateful for their perseverance, their tenacity, and their belief that dreams do actually come true. I'd like to present to you the names of each of our founding members, and after being named, I would ask all of them to stand up and wait for our toast, and then come forward for their group photo, and wish each of them a mazel tov. It's hard to believe that 50 years have gone by since we moved the portable to Bayview Avenue and put the shovel in the ground on Bayview for our new building. So I'm going to call out the names of the founding members. Would you kindly stand, and then you'll come forward. Marlene Axsmith, and a thanks for this evening, Marlene. Hannah Ballack, Leo and Mona Brown, Fran King, Helen Daniels, myself and Shirley Ann, Lorna Hannock, representing his parents, Irving Zichrono Livracha, and Ruth Hannock, Ken and Rita Karp, Harvey and Beryl Kaufman, Marilyn Mudrick, representing her parents, Morris Sobel, the late Morris Sobel, and Diane Sobel, Paul and Cecile Nightingale, Gloria Pincus, Fred and Marcia Rosen, Milton Rasonic, Eva Stahl, Norman and Simone Stern, Reva Stern, Sheldon and Norma Weingarten, and Ron Weintraub. Would you stay standing? And I'm going to propose a toast to all of our founding members and to all of our members who represent the past, the present, and the future of our wonderful Beth Tikvah community. That's exactly what I'm going to do. L'chaim to all of you. Okay, I'm going to ask the photographer. What? I missed it. Do it again. Okay, Helen, what did I miss? Fred and Bed Schaefer, did I miss them? I thought I had them. Let's see. I'm adding you. I'm adding you. Happens every time. Every time. Okay. So, photographer, they're in your hands. Founding members, would you please come forward? Ladies and gentlemen, there is absolutely no way that we can honor Beth Tikvah's 50th anniversary without hearing from our founding rabbi. A big thank you to Bracha Feder for interviewing her father, Rabbi Feder, while recently in Israel, for producing the following video.
Shalom and Mazal Tov. Founding a synagogue community in a relatively new neighborhood, I think we'd all agree is a real challenge. I'm reminded of a phrase that I heard first as a child in what I thought was Yiddish, but really was Hebrew, when we were talking about particular challenges and difficulties, and the phrase was Kol Hascholas Koshes, which I realized later was really Hebrew. Kol Hatchalot Kashot. All beginnings are difficult. Now, when one thinks in terms of organizing, founding a synagogue community, one needs vision, one needs quite a bit of daring, and once the project gets started, that's when one has to test his or her own convictions and commitments to see the project through. And what should we say? Thank God, and I congratulate you, founding members of Beth Tikvah. Going back to 50 years plus, we had the vision and the daring, and once the project got started, and it has continued for over 50 years, shown conviction and commitment to keep this project going. It's been through people like yourselves who've been able to make a community represent the highest standards as a Beit Tfilah, a house of worship, a Beit Midrash, highest standards in adult education, and youth education, and children's education, and of course, as a Beit Knesset, a community, a house of assembly that has put all the members of your community, of our community, in touch with the major issues of Jewish life, including, of course, issues surrounding Israel. And this kind of hatchala kasha, difficult beginning, has given you and has given us, has given myself as founding rabbi, so much to be proud of that I congratulate you, yourselves, your children, your grandchildren, and the descendants, and may Beth Tikvah continue to grow from strength to strength. La'ela ula'ela. Amen. Mazal tov again.
Wow. Thank you, Harvey. So before we eat, I mentioned when we started this evening that Kathy and I have only been members for 11 years, but my association with Beth Tikvah began 25 years ago when I came here in the evenings to say Kaddish for my father. While doing so for months, I met a lady who befriended me, who was also saying Kaddish, who turned out to be the president at the time, Merle Goldman. So it's with great irony and pleasure that I have the opportunity to invite Merle to say a few words about the role of women in growing our shul. Merle?
I was just told I have 5 minutes, which I already knew, but I have to explain the message from Rabbi Fader. It was me who taped that, who videoed him. I phoned him when I got to Israel a couple of weeks ago, and I said, I have a job to do. I have to, the shul is having a dinner. They want a message. And I said, can I come to your house? And he said, no, I'll meet you for lunch. So this is his favorite restaurant. If anybody knows Jerusalem, it's at right across from the Inbal Hotel. They know him so well that the waitress said, so you're having X and X? And he said, yep, that's what I'm having. And I thought, oh my God, it's like a beautiful day. There's traffic, there's the staff walking around. And we went into the corner of the restaurant, and I prayed a lot that you'd be able to hear the message. So there it is. And it was my first time that I had actually sort of videoed somebody, so I was a bit nervous. Okay, so my friends, and in many ways my family for nearly 50 years. It is a privilege to stand here tonight reflecting on the role of women in Beth Tikvah's history. Today, I think we are quite proud of the fact that finally in 2017 we are a totally egalitarian congregation. Some are happy because they can now be personally involved ritually in roles that had been exclusively male territory. Some are supportive because they see this change not as something with which they are personally comfortable, but something that is good for their children and grandchildren, and possibly for the future of Beth Tikvah. When I think back to my first days as a synagogue member, what I remember with great clarity are some of the women who shaped my involvement in those years. Being involved ritually was not a priority and was very much a reflection of our societal norms. But even then, in an era when many shuls in Toronto did not allow women to sit on their boards or participate in services at all, women at Beth Tikvah certainly were an integral part of the formation of this synagogue. Women sat on the Beth Tikvah board from its inception, Beth Tikvah being the first conservative synagogue in Toronto to have women on its board and executive. And we played strong and active leadership roles in creating the environment which has brought this synagogue to where it is today. Today, sisterhood is an archaic word. But in the 60s and 70s, the bonds of women, through the roles they played, were not only strong, but led to long and lasting friendships. Beth Tikvah was a nurturing environment for many of us. The roles and leadership opportunities in both the Beth Tikvah Sisterhood, now Beth Tikvah Women, and on the synagogue board offer the opportunity to build a set of skills that many of us have successfully used in so many other settings. The women through the sisterhood organize many outstanding programs and fundraising events, of which the famous Beth Tikvah Art Show still stands out. Although there are so many women who deserve mention, I am only going to mention the sisterhood presidents who are here tonight: Helen Daniels, Shirley Ann Haber, Norma Weingarten, Marcia Rosen, Marilyn Cohen, Fran Kane, Toby Zinette, and myself. So let's go down our memory lane. My very first recollection of Beth Tikvah leadership was Helen Daniels. When we first joined in 1969, it was Helen, whom I had met previously, I won't even go into that, who approached me and said, do something. And although I had said, not me, sisterhoods are for my mother's generation, Helen opened the door for me to be an active and involved member. And kudos to women like Jackie Weintraub, Zichrona Livracha, who always said it the way she saw it, and helped ensure a voice for women in the life and environment of Beth Tikvah, and to Rita Karp, the first woman to sit on the Beth Tikvah executive. The years went by, and because women already played an integral role in the Beth Tikvah community, it was a natural evolution that we should want to play a greater role in our synagogue's ritual life. The first door was actually opened in 1981 by Rabbi Feder. Before he made Aliyah, and for those who remember or attended his Monday night adult education classes, he taught a segment on women and halakha, our first serious educational exposure, but that was far from enough. And Marcia Raisin, Zichronah Livracha, who in her own quiet way inspired, taught, and led the women of this synagogue to think beyond their existing boundaries, but that also was far from enough. And there were those of us who programmed and organized lectures with visiting rabbis such as Dini Lewittis and others from the Jewish Theological Seminary, who taught and illustrated that women could play a halachic role, and that was not enough. And in the meantime, women assumed greater and more frequent leadership roles in the synagogue, including 3 female presidents: myself, Judy Shulman, Zichronah Livracha, and Heather Shapiro. And that was considered perfectly mainstream. Morley Goldberg was a huge advocate of women's involvement ritually and inspired a major panel discussion on the topic, but still not enough. And the years continued to pass by with younger women who had grown up at Beth Tikvah either speaking with their feet or their actions, clearly saying that the time had to come for women to have the right to full halachic involvement with all of the responsibility that can come with it. And finally, the juxtaposition of change both inside and outside the synagogue took place, and the congregation itself said, Hineni, we are here. We deserve to respect women and men equally. And today, thanks to Rabbi Grover, hand in hand with the board and the majority of the membership, we can all imagine a future filled with promise. That does not mean we can sit back and say we have made it. No one, male or female, can or should say that. There is still a long road to greater and active involvement for all of us. Many of us can fortunately look back at the first 50 years. What will the next 50 bring? Only working together, male and female, younger and older, will we have a chance at ensuring that the next 50 years continue to be relevant and a house of hope and inspiration for our children and grandchildren. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Merle. Geez, I didn't know you felt that way. So, it's my pleasure to announce that dinner is served. I guess that automatically happens or something or other, but we can now dine.
Our keynote speaker tonight, Ron Daniels, is a native Torontonian who is well known on a personal basis to many Beth Tikvah congregants through family connections to the synagogue. Son of the late Phil and Helen Daniels, founding members of Beth Tikvah, Ron was among the first generation of children to grow up here. In 2009, Ron was appointed as the 14th president of Johns Hopkins University, a Baltimore, Maryland-based global research institution with a fully integrated academic, medical center, and health system that is world-renowned. 3 overarching themes have marked Ron's tenure as he championed enhanced interdisciplinary collaboration, individual excellence, and community engagement. In his writing, his advocacy, and his personal commitment, Ron has taken a leadership role in a number of areas, including urban engagement, especially within the local Baltimore community, funding of research in general, and young researchers more specifically, and fostering innovation and entrepreneurialism. A former dean of the law school at the University of Toronto and the vice president and provost of the University of Pennsylvania, Ron became a member of the Order of Canada in December 2016. Ron's own words will illustrate why we are so excited to have him as our keynote speaker at our celebration of the generations tonight. Be vigorous, bold, and smart in championing the truths you have discovered and hold dear. These are his words, and they are great instructions for us as well to follow as we embark on our second half century. It's now a great privilege for me to welcome and introduce President Ron Daniels.
Well, thank you so much. I guess first, Rabbi Grover, thank you for not introducing me as Ronnie Daniels. I can remember, I don't know, Mom, if you remember this, but there was a time, and Simone Stern will remember this, there was a time when we were living in Casa Loma, and we were living in one house. We moved to a slightly larger house when we had more kids. And we should have been able to do the most easy move known to mankind, which was we were moving 2 houses away, and I had this dream. I was in the dean of the law school, and I had this dream that I'd get a few first-year students who were kind of ambitious. They were not yet on the upper year and becoming cynical, that we would just simply one day corral them, give them $20, and they would move our house 2 houses over. But as it turns out, we couldn't get the closing dates to align. And so it meant that for about a period of 2 months, we had to move out of our house, put everything in storage, and we basically moved in with my folks on Fifeshire, Joanna and I and the 4 kids. This is exactly the same time that I had just been appointed dean of the law school. And I can remember at that time, there was a lot of, Ron Daniels, the boy dean, and a lot of this going on. And I was constantly trying to do my best to put on my most statesman-like face that I, in fact, was much older and more sophisticated than everyone knew that I was. But I can remember very vividly, there was a day that the provost, there was some emergency on the campus, and they were trying to track me down. They couldn't find me anywhere, and so someone gave them my folks' number, and the provost phoned and said, I'm trying to track down Dean Daniels, and kind of couldn't understand that, who was on the other line. It was my dad, who said, just a minute, and at the top of his lungs yelled, Ronnie, there's a call for you. And so the provost he let it slip, I let it slip. The next day, when I was assembled with all of the deans, the provost went out of his way to frequently refer to me as Ronnie Daniels. And he, at one point, pulled me aside. He said, there is this whole sort of narrative as you as a boy dean, but he said, do you really still live with your parents? So with that, let me say how truly, truly honored I am to be here tonight. From the earliest moments of this congregation's birth to the purchase and then the placement of the portable that constituted the first permanent home of the synagogue on Woodbine Avenue, to the Bayview land assemblage, to the design and then construction of this building, the establishment of a congregational religious school, and then of a satellite primary school campus for the United Synagogue Day School, to the early financial challenges of somehow managing to service the mortgage on this building, to the debates over observance and spiritual leadership, to the community observance and celebration of the holidays, and to the births, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, weddings, and funerals that were marked together. Beth Tikvah was and has been an integral part of my parents' lives. For 50 years for my mom and a tad shorter for my dad, affiliation with this community gave and has given definition, meaning, and purpose to their lives. It was a place where they and the other founders who were mentioned earlier this evening, would add their chapter to the history of the Canadian Jewish community. A chapter that honored and memorialized the cataclysm of the Holocaust, of the millions of lives lost, of the communities destroyed. A chapter that also sought, in some small way, to look forward, to rebuild, and to reassert Jewish survival. A chapter that took hope and sustenance from the miracle of the establishment of the State of Israel and its many triumphs against the long odds of endless military campaigns, terrorism, and more recently, international condemnation. A chapter that marked the assertion of a confident Jewish identity in a country, Canada, that was itself new and wondrous, and engaged in an experiment that sought not only to accommodate the country's many collective identities, but to draw strength, to draw energy and optimism from each of them. If Beth Tikvah stood at the very fulcrum of my parents' lives, so too did it for the many dear friends who together constituted the nucleus of members who made the idea of Beth Tikvah real. And it's so nice to see so many of you here this evening. It is easy in retrospect to believe that this place was inevitable, but as so many people here tonight know only too well, it was not. And it was the founders' shared commitment to a driving dream, as well as their love, affection, and support for each other that made Beth Tikvah, the House of Hope, a reality. And so, when Rabbi Grover reached out to me last spring to invite me to deliver these remarks, I was delighted, really delighted to accept. My sense of obligation to and respect for my parents and their close and dear friends commanded no less. This, despite the obvious fact that within the ranks of the founders' children, the second generation, so to speak, there were many whose scholarly records from their years at the Beth Tikvah Congregational School were far less, let us euphemistically say, complicated than mine. As my parents were only too well aware, as firmly committed as they were to my having a rounded and comprehensive Jewish education, so was I, but in the opposite direction. Mostly, my tender years at Beth Tikvah's Congregational School were marked by hours perched on a three-legged stool in the hall outside of the classroom where my peers, the Stearns, Ronnie Eisberg, Lauren Honeck, and others, were receiving a sound Jewish education. For me, in truth, promotion from one class to the next was mostly about where precisely in the hall my penalty stool would be located. Most years, the view was fairly drab, cinder blocks on the wall opposite my solitary stool. But in some lucky years, I was seated opposite the boys and girls washrooms or the janitor's closet, where I could track the comings and goings of classmates, cleaning staff, and sometimes, if I was lucky, Lou Blatt, the executive director, who would surreptitiously talk to me, thereby defying what I am sure was Ralph Troper's and later Avi Yoeli's strict injunction that I was to be ignored. Indeed, I can well remember when my campaign of petty rebellion landed me in a meeting in the rabbi's basement study with my parents, Principal Avi Yoeli, and Rabbi Fader. I can also recall my father's fury when I could not, because of a newly acquired sense of uncompromising honesty, commit to Rabbi Fader that I would change my ways and become a more dutiful, less disruptive student. Instead, I confessed with a hint of pained regret that I knew better than anyone how incapable of reform I was, and that it seemed downright immoral and perhaps even sacrilegious to attest to a rabbi that I would take appropriate measures at self-control when I knew I would not. That meeting ended with my even rebuffing Rabbi Feders generously offered olive branch that if I couldn't or if I wouldn't commit to being less disruptive in class, then perhaps I could at least try to be better. That, to me, was just a philosophical sleight of hand that I, in good conscience, could not accept, and I had to reject that as well. The meeting ended unceremoniously. Rabbi Feder shrugged, rolled his eyes, and looked sheepishly at Principal Ueli as if to say that he had done his best, and having done so, wanted to get back as quickly as possible to matters far more consequential than dealing with my misconduct. I, on the other hand, felt triumphant that I had appeared to have withstood the collective weight of the educational and spiritual leadership at Beth Tikvah. But alas, to my great chagrin, I had learned that my parents were not without remedies. I was grounded for 3 months. That and a short but pointed conversation with my revered grandfather brought me to heel. So now, some 40 years later, you may be thinking that all evidence suggests I should be the last person afforded the opportunity to speak to you tonight and to honor a place that was so integral to the lives of my parents and their close friends. But I can only thank you for this privilege and the opportunity, with 40 years of hindsight, to convey what I now see so clearly, the extent to which Beth Tikvah had imprinted its values, its aspirations, its sense of community on me. And I hope that I'm not taking liberties in believing that the same is probably true for so many children of the founders who, like me, grew up with this synagogue. And how could it not? Beth Tikvah instilled a sense of the possible in us. From the early glimmers of our parents' shared idea of wanting to build something that would anchor the fledgling Toronto Jewish population in the northern suburbs of Toronto, to the flourishing community that it is today, the creation of this place demonstrated the almost unstoppable power of bold and daring dreams. Herzl famously said of the state he imagined, "If you will it, it is no dream." And in word and in deed, our parents showed us that firm belief, tireless ingenuity, and unflagging persistence could make a dream real. A dream of a place dedicated to spiritual expression, to Jewish community, and to the centrality of education to changing lives. Beth Tikvah stood for something else as well. The capacity of a community, of a hevra, to do things that would be unimaginable for any one person to do on their own. I well remember the seemingly endless hours of devotion that each of the founding families committed to this enterprise, the endless meetings, discussions, debates, and how each individual's efforts and strengths were nourished, amplified, and enriched by the others. I also came to understand how the Beth Tikvah community served as an extended family that helped shepherd me to adulthood and gave me and so many of the second-generation children a foundation that forged self-confidence, ambition, empathy, and optimism. Through endless hours in and outside of Beth Tikvah, this sense of family was nurtured. First and foremost, during the annual cycle of holidays that were celebrated in the sanctuary and chapel, but also in casual barbecues and sports events, and dinners in our homes that mark family milestones, even in the ample time spent in carpools going back and forth to Hebrew school. I knew, each of us knew, that in each of these venues, there were multiple eyes watching out for us, admonishing us when we veered from the right path, celebrating us when we succeeded, and supporting us when we stumbled or failed. We were children of a very large and very engaged, sometimes I reckoned overly engaged, family. My mind, indeed, often leaps back to this idyllic childhood and the role of Beth Tikvah when I stop to ponder the almost unfathomable circumstances in which a great swath of children is coming of age in my adopted city, Baltimore. For almost 9 years now, as as a resident of Baltimore and president of an institution that is daily confronted with and deeply engaged in addressing the staggering consequences of so many children growing up in a world of persistent and palpable poverty, of pervasive violence, of endemic drugs, of ubiquitous illness, of failed or failing schools, and of hideous, disabling racism, I'm at a loss, truly at a loss, to explain or understand in the stark differences in our faiths. Why did I enjoy the warm embrace of a family and community where I could test boundaries and safely find my way, while so many of Baltimore's young people are subject to such crippling deprivation and denial, and instead find themselves on a lonely and dangerous journey that brooks no room for error? The answer is, of course, complex and is both obvious and elusive in its mix of circumstance, history, and luck. But whatever the answer, I know with certainty the importance of taking action, of initiative to redress, to disrupt this reality. And here I think, as I think of the possibilities for change, I frequently find myself fortified by this model of community building that we all learned firsthand from watching our parents build their dream. When I find myself working with others in Baltimore across some often highly improbable institutional and denominational boundaries, I hear the echoes of Beth Tikvah community ringing in my ears. It's the impulse to create places that nurture and connect individuals as we work with our neighbors to revive acres of vacant and barren blocks by creating parks, affordable housing, and schools. It's the energy of a large community knitting together to support and amplify the strengths of its individual members as we work with community leaders, government officials, and CEOs to launch programs that offer not just a paycheck, but the dignity of a career to hundreds of men and women from our most distressed neighborhoods, or those who are fresh out of prison and in desperate need of a second chance. It's the power of that much-needed safety net when we extend health care to the indigent through our hospital, clinics, and in schools across our city. For me, in my work in Baltimore, it is a touchstone for seeing the possibility for rejuvenating a community and for drawing upon the resilience, hope, and optimism and the partnerships that would turn bold and daring dreams into reality. I know that each of us in the second generation will take different lessons, draw different interpretations from our exposure to and involvement in this amazing community that is Beth Tikvah. But all of us, I am sure, share one thing, and that is that we are better for this affiliation. To the founders of this community, thank you for what you bequeathed to each and every one of us in the second generation and in the many generations to follow. It's truly a privilege to be here this night with all of you.
I've asked Ron if he could just join me here on the Oprah couch following his address for just a short follow-up and a brief discussion about some of the comments that he made tonight, and also some questions that I have for him that I think I wouldn't mind if we answered even in public like this, about challenges to the community, challenges to this notion of belonging and a sustaining community that you described, and how you've tackled some of those challenges on a much larger scale, but I think in a parallel or similar way to us at Johns Hopkins. I loved your remarks tonight. Sharing personal experiences and how how understanding your story better has helped you to understand the circumstances of others. I think often what our struggle has been in keeping a community together is seeing the perspective of the other and still valuing the presence of someone with a very different opinion than you or different story than you have in the same community. I was taken by that reflection because the story we get, maybe it's a biased story in Canada, but the story we get about cities like Baltimore and just in general political culture in the United States is a story of a people really grappling with this idea of seeing in the other a story, a person, an experience, and trying to relate to that story. Have you found that little successes in your work might help to bridge other divides around the country in one sense, that is, larger divides in American society? Give us some tips and hints about that. But also the reverse. How can, even in a little community like this, how could we take your example and learn to maintain the strength that established the institution and has kept it together for all of these years? Does that make sense?
So let me start. And maybe just a few quick seconds to give you a sense of the context in which a lot of the work that I've been doing with others in Baltimore. You know the story of Baltimore. Baltimore is a city now of about 650,000 people. 30 years ago, it was about 1.1 million people. It's a story that has replicated itself in many American cities, and of course it's a story of deindustrialization, that at one time Baltimore had Westinghouse, General Motors, Bethlehem Steel. These were manufacturing plants that drew African Americans from the South to Baltimore, where they settled and had good lives, blue-collar jobs, and there was a sense of stability within the city. And of course, with the riots following Dr. King's assassination in 1968, the city suffers significant white flight, significant deindustrialization, and what you're left with is a city that is, to say it's a city of two solitudes is almost can't even capture the magnitude of the disparities that you see. And so if you look at the life expectancy in the most affluent neighborhood in Baltimore and compare it to the least affluent neighborhood, you'll find about a 22-year difference in life expectancy. And just think about that. These people are living 22 years less than people in the most affluent neighborhoods. And that kind of disparity, which reflects high levels of unemployment, a failed school system, chronic intergenerational poverty, it's just a whole series of social malaise that evolves from this that is just striking. And it's funny when you say, can you see the other? What I think is in some sense most tragic about places like Baltimore, and I should say that although Baltimore, and we know Baltimore particularly because it's celebrated or at least ridiculed for the violence in the city, which is so dramatic given the size of the city. But the truth is these disparities that we see in Baltimore are manifest in most American cities. So this is something that's more graphic and arresting in the case of Baltimore, but it's there in all American cities. But what I was going to say is that what's most jarring about it all is how inured so many people are to this reality. And so, even, I have very deliberately, when I talk about the kids in the Baltimore City school system, and the attrition rate is terrible of the school system, but what's even more depressing is those kids who manage to get through the system, who graduate, end up having a level of competence on national testing which reveals that they have very low skill levels, that again, to complete the program does not mean they're equipped to go into not even university, but community college, and again, just basic literacy and numeracy problems. And so what's so striking is that, when I talk about these kids, I say our kids. And when you're talking to a lot of the folks that have been in Baltimore, again, for generations, you can see how uncomfortable they are with that, because in truth, they don't see the other. They don't see themselves or see even the extent to which, in the most mercenary terms, all the concessions they make because of the violence in the city, because they won't get at some of these fundamental problems that we suffer. So, where it was really striking for me, and I think it was really in a lot of ways for both Joanna and me, I think our most difficult moment was after Freddie Gray's death. And you know the story of Freddie Gray, a black man who ends up dying in police custody in circumstances that we still don't fully understand. He seemed to have been taken for a rough ride in the back of a police van. But in truth, there was no serious threat posed to the police by this particular man. And of course, the city erupts in violence after Freddie Gray's death. But what was so striking was that in other American cities that had seen these situations where a black man dies in police custody, the city, Ferguson, for instance, moved into high action, and they had task force and all sorts of investigations and public debates and discussions about what was wrong with their city, what were the things they could do to change it. And this became something that was very consuming for the city. But what's so striking about Baltimore was that after Freddie Gray's death, nothing, I mean it, nothing happened. And it was remarkable. There was no sense of, what do we do about the schools? Or what do we do about joblessness? Or what do we do about all these things that were implicated in the story? And it's really interesting because, Baltimore was about the fourth or fifth city in this, that sort of the year of Black Lives Matter. Baltimore was at the fourth or fifth city to suffer one of these tragic deaths of a black man at the hands of police or in police custody. And the commentary, if you watch CNN and the other national news media, was constantly this drumbeat that there was not black leadership, that this was a situation where blacks were not well represented in city council, or there wasn't a black police commissioner, or there just weren't enough blacks in the police force. That was a narrative. And then they got to Baltimore. Baltimore had a black mayor. Baltimore had a black police commissioner. Baltimore had a black-dominated city council. And yet this happened. And so what was interesting is the national media sort of picked up on the story of, well, this is actually more complicated, so let's start trying to understand what's going on in Baltimore that made this happen. And what was so interesting was, as national media were doing that, the city itself wasn't. So I think this sense of how you can actually try and find ways to rebuild the capacity for empathy, just for seeing others, and seeing in some sense what's so striking now in America is that the story that has been reported for about a decade now by sociologists, both on the left and the right, about the extent to which the white middle class is now suffering a lot of the same problems that have been long associated with the black underclass. You're now seeing in some sense that this is not just about blacks, this is about people who are growing up in grinding poverty without hope. And so how you change the narrative I think is really tricky. It's a story for another day about what's going on in terms of our national politics. But at least at the local level, what I found really very uplifting, and in some sense it really does take a leaf out of the book of Beth Tikvah, is that one of the time-honored propensities of Baltimore, when it finally does get its act together and thinks about what it can do to change things, it loves grand plans, big schemes. It's not just education, it's healthcare. It's not just healthcare, it's problems with lack of green space, so that you get these big planning exercises that raise lots of hopes and expectations, and inevitably not much happens from that. And in contrast, and again, this is the kind of the do-it-yourself synagogue, just what was done here is a sense of just people getting together and taking on bite-sized problems and trying to very concretely address them and building really, as I said, improbable coalitions across the spectrum. That's where it gets interesting and where I feel more hopeful. There's just very quickly, there was a really nice moment. There were two nice moments following Freddie Gray when we decided and again, I should just say, Hopkins is the largest private employer in the city of Baltimore and the state of Maryland. So there's about 55,000 employees at Johns Hopkins, so it's a real juggernaut. And you can imagine it has its own history in terms of how particularly the city of Baltimore and the Black community feels about Hopkins, and it's complicated. But we took the view that because not much was happening after Freddie Gray, that the one thing, as I went out and talked to various stakeholders within the city, the one thing that you kept hearing again and again and again from community leadership was what we really want is we're not even looking for reforms of criminal justice. We're not complaining right now about the police. We're unhappy with the police and so forth, but what we really want is a job. We want a job. We want the dignity of having a job. We want the independence and the self-respect of a job. And so we decided that we could be much more effective as a presence in Baltimore if we set clear targets for ourselves in terms of hiring entry-level employees out of the most distressed neighborhoods in Baltimore. We literally identified by street blocks where the worst neighborhoods were, where the income levels were lowest, where the jobless rates were highest, and we made a commitment to hiring from them, made a commitment to using our procurement spend more directed on Baltimore, and the same thing with construction spending. Long story short, we created this program called Hopkins Local, and we shared it with our board of trustees, and it was just this, again, this magic moment of all of a sudden, it had a bandwagon effect, and a few trustees who were Baltimore-based said, well, if Johns Hopkins can stand up and commit itself to these targets, what's our excuse? And so what originally was supposed to be a $20 million project ended up $20 million that we would bring an additional economic stimulus to the city, ended up being a $70 million project. And what's really nice is it brought in 25 Baltimore-based employers that are all doing this with us from across the spectrum. And what's really nice is we just finished our first year under this project, and we ended up hitting the 70 million, which we hoped to have to do over 3 years, we did in the first year. So again, it's just something that's tangible and shows the possibility of progress. The other quick example I give, which very much was born in this very frustrating period after Freddie Gray, that again, just shows the ability of small steps, small things to sometimes make a real difference. So a few months after Freddie Gray and the street protests and so forth, I was meeting with the city health commissioner and having lunch, and I said to her, I said, if you had one wish and you could do one thing for the kids in Baltimore, and particularly in the public school system, what would it be? And she, without missing a beat, she said, eyeglasses. said, what do you mean eyeglasses? She said, well, it's been a chronic problem that we've had in Baltimore. The City Health Commission will go in 3 times during a student's school career, in kindergarten, grade 3 and grade 8, and the City Health Commission goes in and they do vision tests. And so the kids know they either pass the vision test or they fail the vision test. If they fail the vision test, they get a note. And the note goes home to their guardian, whoever's at home, and it says basically, your kids failed the vision test, you gotta go in and get a proper evaluation, a prescription, and get it filled so they can see the board. You know the rest of the story. 75% of the kids who take that note home never get the glasses. So he said, it's this crazy thing. We know there's a problem, but we can't fix it. I said, surely you jest. You're telling me we can't get glasses for the kids? She said, the state won't fund it. I've tried. We've had discussions, endless discussions for more than a decade. We can't get anywhere. So I said, here's the thing. The 1-year anniversary of Freddie Gray is in April. We had this discussion October, November. I said, we're going to get this done. And so long story short, it was this wonderful coalition that came together. We got foundations to put money in. We actually got one of our graduates from Hopkins, has a very successful, some of you may know it, internet eyewear company called Warby Parker, that they agreed to donate all the glasses. And we basically cut a deal with the state that if we, over a 3-year period, were able to show that the provision of glasses changed educational/learning outcomes for the kids, they would agree to pick up the program after we launched it. So basically what we've now got is there's 4 vision vans that are circulating around the city. Now, when the kids get a note saying that they failed the vision test, they go right outside, they go into the van, they get there's an optometrist sitting in the van, he or she does the reading, they get the script, they get the glasses, they choose the glasses, they get 2 sets of glasses because we know that they'll lose them, so we insist that they keep 1 set of glasses all the time in school, and the other set goes home with them. And we're now on track. By the end of next year, every kid in the Baltimore City school system who needs a set of glasses will get a set of glasses. It's a small thing, but not a small thing. I mean, just imagine all the problems you think about in public education, but particularly in the United States. But, just getting everyone to rally around this idea that we'll just get glasses to the kids. And it turns out Hopkins' role in all this, apart from having played a role in helping orchestrate this, we've got our epidemiologists doing the evaluation so that, again, wait for it, if we can actually show that by getting glasses and seeing the board or being able to read a book, you'll do better in school, then the governor has agreed to fund the project. So, I said to the leading ophthalmologist on this project, I said, if you don't get the right result on this one, we're going to take your credentials away. So do your objective science, but we got to see a powerful correlation here. But it's things like this that it's remarkable how good people feel about being able to be part of something bigger than themselves, but something concrete. And so, again, I just think our strategy is trying to find more and more ways in which you can just bring people together from different walks and do small steps, because I think the small steps lead to bigger steps later on.
I think it's really extraordinary, and I hope everyone heard how much Ron views his presidency as not just a position that makes him responsible for a campus and its students and his employees, but you've been an incredible leader also at building bridges and making relationships and making Baltimore a greater city. And I think that in itself is a lesson for us. Sometimes our greatest mission might be found outside of the gates of our synagogue, not just among ourselves. It's our 50th commemoration-ish, and Jews worry. I think part of the commemoration celebrations came with a lot of worry about what the future is going to bring. a lot of changes going on in the world, changes in a new generation, changes in the way of thinking, and also maybe the loss of social capital now starting to affect synagogues and churches in more profound ways. I wonder what you worry about most, about maybe because of current issues or issues you see down the road. What worries you most about the future of higher education in America? What message you'd like us to hear about ways that we can sustain a positive vision for education and for dialogue, educational dialogue in constructive ways for the future?
So it's a great question. I mean, the first thing I don't worry about is the millennials. I mean, they're amazing. You know, they're action-oriented, they're passionate, they're hardworking, they're entrepreneurial. So this sense of the entitlement factor and the limited commitment to initiatives that are bigger than themselves, I think it's really a mischaracterization. I think they're a great generation and feel really buoyed to be able to be with them. But if there is an issue I worry about, and it's not just about education, I think it's more generally, it's about America, and I think in truth it's about the industrialized democracies. It is the, I'm going to choose my word carefully here, but it is, if not indifference, but the lack of appreciation for and commitment to the value of liberal democracy. So, you know, it's really striking if you look at the Pew polling, you see something that's happened that's very significant over the last 5-10 years, and that is increasingly a higher percentage of young adults in the United States and indeed other parts of the world, particularly in Western Europe, are becoming more open-minded about the possibility of authoritarianism. I mean, just, you know, this sense of this resignation, indifference to the possibility of non-democratic leadership. That's something that is really, really worrisome to me. You know, there's been a lot of attention over the last couple of years about free speech on campus and why are the students shutting down, disinviting certain speakers. And you know, there's been these celebrated events at Middlebury and Yale and Berkeley, a lot at Berkeley. And you know, it starts actually, interestingly enough, and here I confess I'm really a very strident free speech guy. I think it's free speech, it's open debate that sets the academy apart from other institutions in society. But what's interesting is, I don't think we've actually even taken the time to tell the story in very basic terms to the next generation about the theory of free speech or open democracy and why this matters. I think we've just kind of assumed, you know, that it's obvious and compelling and we don't have to actually teach it and recommit to it in a very powerful way. I was very worried about this at Hopkins, just this sense that we had nothing on the scale of a Berkeley or some of these other incidents, but I was worried that just you could see the eclipse of the idea of just the importance of hearing other views. And even if they upset you, you've got to be in a situation where you're able to respond to things that you don't agree with, to be in a position where claim meets claim and you have this kind of contestation. Anyhow, long story short, we decided this year to start off the year for the first time ever and just explain to the kids why this is a first-year class, why free speech matters, and why open debate matters. And what was so remarkable for such an incredibly talented class that we're able to recruit, a lot of students were saying, I haven't heard this before. No one's actually done the arguments for free speech before and why this matters in a democratic polity. They were asking questions like, why should this really matter to me? Why is this a value that matters to me? So for me, that's kind of a microcosm because I feel if, particularly in the context of institutions like Hopkins or Toronto or McGill, name your favorite research university. If our students don't get it, if the next generation doesn't get a lot of these ideas, then you can start to understand the kind of appeal that these non-democratic impulses have in broader society. And look, for those of us, I tell Joanne, who I wake up to Joanne reading on her iPad and saying, do you know what Trump said today? Do you know what he said yesterday? And just being consumed with rage about this or that abridgment of civil liberties or any of a number of issues, or just basic debasement of the office. And she'll do that in the morning, and then we'll go to bed at night. And she'll say, do you know what he did today? At one point I said, Joanne, here's the deal. We get through the next 4 years. We can do Trump in the morning, we can do Trump at night, but we can't do Trump in the morning and in the night. It's got to be one or the other. And so we've come to an understanding that. But I do think that this is actually a very scary time in America. And in terms of what we saw in Charlottesville, and just, as the Washington Post said the other day, they're not dog whistles, they're mating calls to the reactionary right that are being expressed by a lot of people. And so again, I think this is a time that we can't be complacent about why liberal democracy matters, why core rights matter. And I think we really do have to work hard to educate ourselves and the next generation about what's at stake. It does feel at times that there's I don't want to get too shrill and say it feels existential, but there are moments when you do really feel that the core fabric of American society is coming apart. And this is a moment when I think all of the key institutions, media, the academy, and others, really do have to stand up in a very powerful way to push back at some of these really ugly instincts we're seeing expressed.
Thank you. Shall I give him his gift? Ron, on behalf of the synagogue, I want to present you with, I have to remember what we got you. Doris, do you want to help me out? Could you come up here, please? Doris is our executive director, and I can't tell you how much your presence here tonight made our 50th celebrations feel complete. I think seeing someone who grew up in this synagogue become such a force for goodness in the world, and hearing how you become such a force for good in the world. Despite your experiences in our Hebrew school, I'm sure fills so many of us with a great deal of pride. If we've done nothing in this place, at least we've created someone like Ron, who helped a little bit on his path, who's done and continues to do wonderful things to make the United States, to make North America, to make the world a better place to live in. So please, everyone, join me again in applauding and thanking Ron. And Doris, it's
a double gift. It has something about Canada inside of it, so you don't forget where you come from, and something to remember every Shabbat.
Thank you so much.
Again, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to have some coffee, tea, and dessert, and then we'll be having a quick wrap up afterwards. But if I had a vision in my mind of the volunteer power couple in this shul, it would be Marilyn and Bobby Cohn. So there's simply no aspect of this shul that these two haven't been involved in one way or another. So it's only fitting for them to lead us in the Birkat HaMazon.
V'veirai nevarech. Yehi shevarana brachmet avad olam. Birshut Baruch Eloheinu shechalnu mishelo. Baruch Eloheinu shechalnu mishelo. U'tuvo chayinu. Baruch hu baruch shemo. Baruch atah Adonai. Eloheinu melech haolam. Hazan et haolam kulo b'tuvo. Chen b'chesed u'brachamim. Hu noten lechem lechol basar. Ki le'olam chasto. U'b'tuvo hagadol. Tamir l'chasar lanu. Yasar lanu mazon. L'olam va'ed ba'avul shemo hagadol. Ki ozanu fares l'hakol. U'metziv l'hakol u'mechil mazon. L'chol briotot asher bara. Baruch atah Adonai. Hazan et hakol. Nodeh lecha v'nai v'nechal avotenu. Eretz chemda tova v'chava. V'yashol tzeitzanu Adonai lahelim eretz Mitzrayim. U'tidanu mibeit avadim. V'al britcha shechatamta b'bsarenu. V'al toracha shelibaretzanu. V'achukecha shorantanu.
Valachim v'chefer shonatanu, valachilak mazon, shatazanu farnesotanu tamid,
v'chol hayom v'chol et, u'v'chol eshah. V'al hakol Adonai Eloheinu, nachnu modim lach, u'marchim otach, yibarach shemecha, b'fi kol chai tamid le'olam va'ed. Katu v'yachalta, v'savata u'v'erachta, et Adonai Elohecha, ha'aretz atov asher natan lach, Baruch atah Adonai, ha'aretz v'al hamazon. Rachem Adonai Eloheinu, ha'yisrael ha'melcha, v'yerushalayim yirecha, ve'al Tzion mishkan kivodecha, ועל מלכות בית דוד משיחך, ועל הבית הגדול והגדול אשר נקרא שמך עליו. אלוהינו אבינו, שונאינו, פרנסנו, וכלכלנו, והרוויחנו, והרווח לנו, אדוני אלוהינו מרב מכל צרתנו. ואל תצריכנו, אדוני אלוהינו. לא לידי מתנת בשר ודם לא להלוותם. כי אם לך המלאה, הפתוחה קדושה והרחבה, שלא נבוש ולא נקלם לעולם ועד. ובני ירושלים נראה קודש במהרה בימינו, ברוך אתה אדוני, ועונה ברחמיו ירושלים אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אל אבינו מלכנו אדירנו, בורנו גואלנו, יוצרנו קדושנו קדוש יעקב, רואינו ישראל, המלך הטוב המציב לכל, שבכל יום ויום, הוא היטיב ומציב ויציב לנו. וגם לנו, וגם לנו, תגמלנו לעד, לכן חסד רחמים, ורווח הצלה והצלחה, ברכה וישועה, נחמה פרנסה וכלכלה, ברחמים, בחיים ושלום וכל טוב, ומכל טוב ולמה יחסרנו. הרחמן ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. אמן. הרחמן הוא יתברך בשמיים ובארץ. אמן. הרחמן הוא ישתבח לדעת ההרים, ויתפאר בנו לעד ולנצח נצחים, ויתהדר בנו לעד ולעולמי עולמים. הרחמן יפרנסנו בכבוד.
Amen. Arachaman, hu yishpar aleinu me'asav areinu, v'hu yolichenu, kama miyut li'artzenu.
הרחמן ישלח לנו ברכה מרובה בבית הזה ועל שולחן זה שאכלנו עליו. הרחמן ישלח לנו את אליהו הנביא. הרחמן ישלח לנו את אליהו הנביא זכור לטוב. ויבשר לנו ויבשר לנו בשורות טובות
ישועות ונחמות.
הרחמן יברך את מדינת ישראל ראשית צמיחת גאולתנו.
אמן. הרחמן, הוא יברך את חיילי צבא הגנה לישראל העומדים על משמר ארצנו.
הרחמן הוא יברך את כל synagogue presidents, sisterhood presidents, founding members, וכל המסובין כאן, אותנו ואת כל אשר לנו, כמו שנתברכו אבותינו, אברהם, יצחק ויעקב, וכל מכל כל, כן יברך אותנו, לנו יחד, בברכה שלמה, ונאמר אמן. במהרם ילמדו עליהם ועלינו, זכות שתלם משמרת שלום, ונישא ברחם את אדוני, וצדקה מאלוהינו, ונמצא חן ושכל טוב בעיני אלוהים ואדם. הרחמן יזכנו לימות המשיח, ולחיי העולם הבא. מגדיל ישועות מלכו, ועושה חסד להמשיכו, לדוד ולזרעו עד עולם. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, אמרו אמן. יראו את אדוני כקדושיו, כי אין מסור רעיו, כפירים ישוב ולהבו, ודורשי אדוני לא יסרו כל טוב, הודו לאדוני כי טוב, כי לעולם חסדו, פותח את ידיך, ומשביע לכל חי רצון. ברוך הגבר שיפתח באדוני, היה אדוני מבטחו. נער הייתי גם זקנתי ולא ראיתי צדיק נעזב, בזרעו מבקש לחם, בזרעו מבקש לחם. אדוני עוז ועמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום.
So, no evening of this shul would be complete without a little bit of music from our celebrated Chazan. So, well, I got to say this. It's on the script, Chazan. So, please. And after that, Rabbi Sachs is going to conclude the evening.
Good evening, everyone. It's an honor for me to be here and celebrate with all of you. And thank you for the organizing committee for asking me to sing an hour-and-a-half program for you tonight here. I'd like to introduce my accompanist here tonight, Nathan Rosen, who's a symbol, really a symbol here in Toronto, accompanying over the years tens and who knows, maybe hundreds of chazanim in different concerts. I'm going to sing two songs tonight, that's it, not an hour and a half. First song was composed by Srul Irving Glick, someone who laid down the bricks of the synagogue, musical bricks of the synagogue, and whose music we cherish and whose legacy we we preserve and keep singing it, hopefully for the next generation as well. And a song that he wrote for a centennial of a different synagogue, not for Beth Tikvah, a synagogue in Hamilton, Beth Jacob. And I thought I'll sing it tonight. It's a song about peace, it's a prayer. And I would like you all to sing along with me because I know you know it. Here we go.
שים שלום טובה וברכה, חן וחסד ורחמים, עלינו עלינו ועל כל ישראל עמך. ברכנו אבינו כולנו כאחד באור פניך שים כי באור פניך נתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו תורת חיים באהבת חסד וצדקה וברכה. רחמים וחיים בשלום בטוב בעיניך לבבך איתנך ישראל עול בשלומך שים שלום שים שלום שים שלום טובה וברכה שים שלום טובה וברכה חן וחסד ורחמים עלינו עלינו ועל כל ישראל
And another song about peace, a little more upbeat, so hopefully it'll wake you up a little bit. You sang beautifully along with me. Thank you for that. We'll say shalom, another prayer for peace.
עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו. 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 הוא יעשה שלום, הוא יעשה שלום, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. הוא יעשה שלום, הוא יעשה שלום, הוא יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו. עושה שלום במרומיו, sing on. הוא יעשה שלום עלינו. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו. הוא יעשה שלום, הוא יעשה שלום, הוא יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. הוא יעשה שלום, הוא יעשה שלום, הוא יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. הוא יעשה שלום, הוא יעשה שלום, הוא יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. הוא יעשה שלום, הוא יעשה שלום, הוא יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, הוא יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו. יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל.
Nathan Rosen on the keyboard.
So as we close up our evening right now, my name's Louis Sachs, for those of you who don't know me. and I'm the assistant rabbi here at Beth Tikvah. And when I was asked to give a very brief closing remark that was geared a little bit towards the future as the theme of tonight, the past, the present, and the future, my initial instinct was I've only been here for 4 months, so how do I talk about the future? But a congregant recently came up to me and they pointed out that in these 4 short months, Beth Tikvah has really become my community, and I've already begun to speak like a Canadian. They said, when I call page numbers during Minyan, I said, please turn to page 136A. And but what I wanted to address very briefly was really, there's a phrase we say in our liturgy. When we put the Torah away, we say, Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem, to renew our days like the days of old. And as we place the Torah back in the ark, it's really a claim that we want to take the values that are embodied in the books of our tradition, the values of our forefathers and our foremothers, and we want to take those into our lives. We don't want to live a life like the ancient Israelites, we want to live how they lived, by those values, by the lessons and the messages they taught us. And I really think as we look towards the future at Beth Tikvah, that's the phrase that we want, Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem, that as we move forward, as we continue to grow, as we continue to become a larger community involved in more and more activities, that we look back towards those values of each of you who helped to found this shul, those of you who may not have been here right from the start but have helped to build it to continue to grow. And it's values like Hirsch was talking about volunteerism, values of Jewish learning, really becoming together, becoming that close-knit community. So as we look towards the future, we have to never forget our past, because it's those lessons that are going to guide us as we continue to grow, as we continue to become a bigger and a better community by holding on to what really makes us unique and makes us special here at Beth Tikvah. With that, I want to thank again Ron Daniels for coming to join us this evening. I want to thank each of you for being here this evening, and I want to remind those of you who are founding members to pick up your certificates by Doris at the back table on your way out. And thank you and have a wonderful evening.